Hello all.
Hi friends. Hello and welcome to the NON3PUB Keynote panel. Oh, here is a cat. Welcome to the NON3PUB Keynote panel on narrative design and cats. No, just cats. I am your moderator. My name is Calvin Wong, and with us my guests. Starting from here, this person. Yes, you.
Is it me?
You. Yes.
Right. My name is Yorgos Panagiotis. I'm not sure. Currently, I'm mostly writing articles for German game site Spielbar.com. I try to translate those into English, so they are widely available on lastmyopinions.com. And I am opinionated, obviously, and I do a lot of writing and thinking and arguing about narrative and media, especially board games, and almost kind of getting into the production of those kind of things as well. There's like one or two projects we're doing right now in German about publicly designing a game on a podcast. So yeah, that's me.
Would you say it's fair to say that you're a critic with a capital C?
Yes, probably. I feel a little awkward saying it, but it's probably true, and I should own it more.
Yeah, I mean, you don't. When I say critic, I don't mean that you're mean about games. I mean, in the sense that you are always analyzing and thinking and trying to push the medium forward. And
that's
things like that.
That's a very, very kind and flattering description, and I'll gladly take it.
All right. I realize now that we're going counterclockwise, which is completely wrong for when we're playing board games. But next guest, could you please introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, so we are going this way. All right. Yes. I'm Sami Laakso from Snowdale Design, and I design, illustrate, and publish my own games. People might know my most known game, Dale of Merchants, a deck building card game series. And now I'm working on a really story-heavy game called Lands of Culture. And actually, Calvin is also working on writing some of the stories for the game as well.
Very cool.
And lastly,
I think then we can continue.
Yeah, that way.
Yep. Hello, my name is Cara Centel Dunk. I'm a senior game designer at Fantasy Flight Games. Notable projects I've worked on have included Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition, The Lord of the Rings, Journeys to Middle-earth, and the upcoming Descent, Legends of the Dark.
And what does senior game designer mean?
It means I've done a lot of stuff relating to games. So I make mechanics for games, I develop expansions for games, I do story writing and narrative design for the games. I've in the past produced games, but I no longer have to do that. I have actual producers who do that for me now, which is
What
nice.
does produce mean in this case?
Produce in this case means doing things like getting quotes from factories, and kind of more of the project management level of setting and meeting kind of overall long-term project deadlines, since board games are created over such a long period of time.
Right.
But often dealing specifically with factories.
Right. And also the person who says, no, we can't afford to put more custom dice in the box.
Yeah, the person who's like, please stop putting more things in here. The price is going up.
Okay. I mean, yeah, all right. So thanks. Thank you for all your introductions. I'm very happy to be here talking to all of you about narrative design. We have Heather behind the scenes from NON3PUB also talking about sorry, I didn't even look at the comments. Good morning to everybody in the comments. Thank you for coming to watch us talk about story and narrative in games. Hello, Raven X Corvidae. Hello, Greg is on the go. Hello, Diadorf7. Hello, BGG Sarah. If you want to ask us any questions, you can put them in chat, and Heather will magically pop them up on the screen through the magic of StreamYard. Okay. I believe one of Heather's questions that she wanted to ask everybody was a very simple one, which is, how did you get started in narrative design? Or how did you get started in board games if narrative design does not apply to you? We'll go clockwise this time. Properly, we'll start with Cara.
Yes, so my story is a little bit boring, which is I just applied for a job at a game company.
That's not boring. What are you talking about?
I mean, it's like I saw an open position at a game company that was like, "Hey, we want you to know games and write for them," and I was like, "Well, I'm okay at writing, and I like games, so I'm going to apply for it." And then I did, and now I make games and write for games. So.
No, but so when you said you had liked games before, so that wasn't your first exposure to tabletop games and board games and stuff like that, right?
It wasn't. I've infamously throughout my childhood, I was very into games in general, and I come from a very nerdy family who, we're always playing things like Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons. So I've
so gaming night at the Centel Dunks is lit, is what I'm hearing.
Oh yeah, for sure. One of the like fun facts on my cover letter when I applied was like, I also run like a weekly board game group that is like, blossomed from like 2 players to like a rotating 16 people. I mean, this was ages ago, right? I still run really cool game nights though. Just saying.
Okay, so that's Kara. That's how you got started at FFG, and how long ago was that?
7 years.
7 years. All right. Let's go to Sami.
All right, so I think the most narrative-heavy game I have published so far is a game called Dawn of Peacemakers, and it's basically a war game turned upside down. So there are 2 warring factions, and you're like dropped in the middle of them as an adventurer. You're trying to actually stop the war between them. So the game really lends itself to a heavy narrative-heavy campaign. So it has multiple scenarios that you play one by one. So I think that was I simply wanted to do something really different and fresh in the wargaming genre, and the game itself lent itself heavily to telling stories and having a narrative between the games, and that kind of sparked the imagination of creating a new game like this, the Lands of Culture that I just talked a little bit, and it's an open world, and we really I was also playing Breath of the Wild and got inspired by that as a player it felt really cool to be able to be like dropped in a setting, and then you could go in any direction you wanted and do whatever you wanted, and it felt like the game had no restrictions on you, unlike many of the other games in the market in video games. So I pondered that if could that be made even a little bit a similar way in a board game where you're dropped in a game and the game doesn't tell you exactly what you need to do, but rather just says that go and have fun, go explore every nook and cranny of the game that there is, and that's the road that I'm currently on.
And finally, Georges.
Yeah, I bounced around in all kinds of different games, starting with playing lots of video games, surprisingly, and then to role-playing games, and then I stumbled into everything that isn't the mainstream role-playing, indie RPGs if you want, but yeah. And I stumbled into arguing theory online, and I tried out all kinds of role-playing games, and I was fascinated by how different those experiences were that I had with those games and other people had with those games, and why some of the games I've played didn't work and why some of them did work. And I tried to figure out why that was. What was it about those games that worked and that didn't work, and the interplay between personal dynamics at the table and what the games actually do to help you support those dynamics, and where the narrative comes from, where the story comes from, what it is that we remember that we take out of these games. And all this kind of analytical thinking just had me all over, from literature, which I studied, to film, to going back eventually to board games and how they deal with stories and how they come up with narrative, and why some board games have really strong narratives or feel like they have very strong narratives, and why some games feel like there's a very, very flimsy narrative to the game, and whether it's good or bad, and how people react to it, and all kinds of abstract thinking like that.
Okay. Next question that Heather had. What is your favorite game? I'm going to focus the question slightly. What is your favorite game in the way that it tells stories? You are allowed to say your own game. We'll go from Kara again.
Oh, you picked the worst person to start with, only because I hate picking favorite games. I was going to be like, well, if you want me to pick like the favorite game that does X, Y, and Z.
If not favorite, then something that you've played recently that really excited or intrigued or impressed you. If you can't pick a favorite. Yeah.
So of things I've worked on, I will absolutely plug Descent Legends of the Dark here. We took a really unique approach to narrative design specifically for this game, including having a whole writer's room to develop the quest scenarios and the writing around those, which was a really fascinating experience and really new for us as a board game team. And then for things I didn't work on, I've been super enthralled with Forgotten Waters. And the story they tell, both from the like voice acted app point of view, and the sense of humor in the game, but also from the like ways in which you pick and play your pirates, and that the game kind of supports being kind of a selfish pirate most of the time, but you're still trying to get your own silly endings by acting selfishly sometimes, which I just think is a blast.
It kind of reminds me of Android, the board game, also by FFG from a very long time ago, where you have to investigate the case, but you also have to make sure that your detective gets a happy ending in their personal story. A you say that it's reminiscent or something like that?
I absolutely think it is. I have a huge love for Android the board game. It is a game that pre-pandemic, my friend group and we'd get together to play once a year, and we'd play like rain and jazz music in the background as we played the game, because it's such a rich story experience. So yeah, I definitely think it's in the same tradition as Android the board game.
Sami, what about you?
Yep. So, of course, well, I'm going to skip my own games because it's well, obviously I design games that I love myself, so I can just skip those and people can research them if they want to. But one of my favorite games that plays around with maybe not storytelling as much, but narrative definitely is the Seventh Continent, where you're exploring the unknown, as the name says, the Seventh Continent, and you have some sort of curse put upon you, and you're not quite sure even how you get rid of it. But as you explore and find clues and go and talk with different native people on the continent, you get the tidbits slowly on how to unravel your curse and get rid of it. So that's one that has not too much story, but the gameplay itself and the skill checks and how you actually play the game. They create really nice narrative story. Like an example, I was cursed, and I was at the start my character was a naive explorer who was like hungry and lost and not sure how to survive, and had nightmares of the curse. And by the end, I had my leg was amputated from going to a trap, and I had a wooden leg that I learned to use. And once I found a pirate hat, I just couldn't not use that. So and I also got some sort of companion pet, which I named him Parrot or something like that. So my character kind of turned into a pirate during the game, just because of the mechanics that could happen in different parts, and it was not written in the game itself that's your journey, but it's just because the game one.
It's always beautiful when games express that emergent story that comes out of you playing it rather than it being written in the game. And I do want to talk a lot more about emergent storytelling, but later on. Georgios, what's your favorite narrative game that you've been impressed with?
That's a fantastic segue, though, because I was thinking about, as Kara and Sami were mentioning theirs, that the one that really sort of shaped my understanding of board game narrative was a game that just recently popped up again in conversation, which is Battlestar Galactica, which I think is an amazing design, which shows how you can merge players and players' identity, player dynamics with the structure of the game itself. And like Sami said, which I think was a great way of phrasing it, is in board games, these things don't happen to other characters, they happen to us. And the story that happens at the table doesn't happen to those characters, it happens to us because we are the ones shaping the story. We are literally the protagonists. And And I felt like Battlestar Galactica was a game that really managed to fuse those two layers together. The mechanical layer, like these are your player goals, these are what you have to do, these are the resources you have to take care of, and the personal goals, the sort of like, I don't trust this player to the left of me because they didn't play the right cards or whatever, and they were arguing very, very passionately about putting somebody else into the brig and that kind of stuff. And it just it manages to sort of, like I said, merge like the fiction of the game with the reality of what happens at the table, and it's this combination, I feel, that is really the heart of what narratives in board games do and what they are. And I just find really interesting how Galactica does it and how other games sort of approach the same idea using a different tool set.
We have a couple of questions in the. Oh, someone wants to ask some questions. Creative Damage, you can go ahead and ask the question. Dire Dwarf says, Android is an amazing game, kind of a hot mess, takes a full day to play. There are whole side mechanisms that just do not need to exist. But I love it. Yes, it is one of my favorite games. I absolutely adore it. FFG, please. Second edition, thank you. Kara, talk to your friends. All right. I was talking to someone named Jill Hover, who is a board game designer, and I was on a podcast with him, and he was talking about, he read an essay, I cannot remember the name of the essay, but he basically talked about there's 3 levels of the gamer, right? There's the mind, as in, your strategy when you play the game, say, oh, I want to do this, I want to perform this action. There's the avatar, which is the character that you're playing as, and I noticed that all of the games that we've talked about so far have a direct avatar for the player. It's not an abstract game like in chess, where there is no avatar, kind of, right? You're playing as this, the white pieces. You're not playing as the king, or you're not playing as the rook, right? And the third one is the body, right? The body of the player, which is different from the mind, because the body gets tired, the body spills Cheetos all over the board. The body is playing with, is stacking your components on top of each other in a way that is not meaningful in the game, but is still fun to do. So these are the 3 layers of the player, and narrative is trying to compress all these layers into one. I think is because, for example, if you were to play a game, and you want to take a suboptimal strategy in order to fulfill a sense of personal need. Like, for example, in Seventh Continent, where Sami was playing, right? You might have wanted to if you had presented a choice between 2 pets, and one pet was better than the other, but one of them was a parrot, you might have chosen the less good choice in order to fulfill your storytelling experience of transforming into a pirate. Would you agree that you might have done this in the game?
Absolutely, in a heartbeat.
Yeah, exactly, right? So you take the option that's less good, but you do it to express something, and that's the mind and the avatar being kind of at odds, right? But in a way that fulfills narrative. The next thing I wanted to ask, since we've already done the questions from Heather, is when we talk about narrative in games, we always I think what we talk about is making players feel something, making players want to do something that isn't necessarily optimum. They making players want to do things that, and I'm sure that Kara, you must have seen during all of your play tests and playing of the games that you create, where the objective might be to do, get to the exit, or solve the riddle, or find the omen, or whatever, right? But what the player does is help their friend, because they want to, help their friend. They can't bear the idea of not helping their friend, even though helping their friend might cost them the win, right? And why do you think that? How do you think we can get games to do that more often, right? How do you think we can get games to get players to do something that is that expresses themselves narratively, even if that action is not optimum for victory? And this is a question for everybody, but I'm going to start with Kara.
So what you've just described has been kind of the main thing I've been trying to solve in all of my work for like the last three or 4 years, which is how to either create a game that rewards that kind of play so that you have the time and latitude to make those plays, or how to make a suboptimal move feel rewarding enough. And some of it comes down to there are just kind of different types of players. Like, there are players I know who will take the suboptimal move every time because they get themselves into the narrative. And then there's kind of another circle of players who will never take the suboptimal moves because they are not, the narrative isn't their main concern. And this is a kind of a spectrum of people. And so a lot of designing mechanics is sometimes either figuring out where you want to hit on that spectrum versus having the exact solution that will make everyone play suboptimally because they're so engaged in your story.
Right. Yeah, because some people express themselves through optimal play, quote unquote.
Yep.
Right. And so do you find that it is important to design your game so that it rewards both types of players?
I try to. I don't think all games have to. I think that there are ways, like any genres, right? Like, if you want to make a really good type of game, you can just lean into those players and that type of genre. In the games I've created, tend to try and find a balance between how do I reward the players who just want the mechanical win and the optimal plays, and how do I reward players who want these narrative moments that they're indulged in. Actually, one really great tool for that I've been uniquely able to kind of take care of to truly easily access from working on app integrated games in specific is difficulty levels. So you can introduce difficulty levels that allow players to play suboptimally without feeling like they're like losing or making bad choices, which is basically giving players the power to interact with the game the way they feel most comfortable, whether they want the really challenging experience where there's also storytelling and narrative, but maybe their suboptimal choices are more of a risk versus we just allow suboptimal play because we want you to be able to indulge in a story. So it's that was a long way of kind of saying I don't have an easy answer for how to encourage that suboptimal play. A lot of it sometimes is designing toward what players want to do, because one of the big questions I always ask my playtesters is or fellow designers that I'm working with is I'll be like, okay, you get to this situation in a story. What would you want to do here if you could do anything? And by even just asking that question and ascertaining, like, what are the highest ranked things that people want to do here? We encourage suboptimal play by giving players the things they want to do, right? Whereas if I give them suboptimal options that don't sound interesting, they're never going to take those options because it doesn't hook them and it doesn't appeal to them.
Sami, do you have anything you want to add here with regard to narrative design? Like
Kara was quite exhaustive with her list, but something I want to add is that for me, the more immersed I am in the game, the more likely I'm going to make some suboptimal plays, or maybe I'm not even calling them suboptimal, because basically the more immersed I am, the less I'm bothered about the mechanics, and the more I'm just playing with my gut.
Yeah.
Like making decisions based on that.
I say suboptimal, but if you make the decision that gives you fewer points, but means you're telling the story for years after that, was that really the suboptimal play? You know, I want to go to some audience questions. This one I'm going to just read out, and then you three think about it and give an answer in a minute. So many of these narrative games are huge box, expensive games, and that ties into something I want to ask you all about, which is about physicality of components in storytelling. But we'll get into that later. Are there some great small box games that provide deep narrative? While you all think about that, the next question, Dire Dwarf 7 asks, what are some thoughts you have on conveying the story in games? Which is a huge question. How do you make sure the players understand the story also a gigantic question. I'll try and focus it down a little bit to what I think Dire Dwarf is really asking, which is how do you get the players immersed? Because Sami said just now, when you feel immersed, you will play according to your character's stories, right? But how do you get the player to feel immersed? I think that's something. Any thoughts from Georgios?
Yeah, I was thinking about. I didn't want to be too rude and interrupt any of the others about how to get this narrative to work and the idea of suboptimal choices. And I think you both like the combination of your answers is basically right there. Like the moment you give people different objectives, you realize that what the optimal choice is based on the perspective of each player. So and one game that, like, funnily enough, also FFG game, that has a brilliant rule that does essentially that, and that unfortunately wasn't picked up on again, were the multiple non-exclusive goals in New Angeles, where every player can win independently of whether somebody else wins or loses. They have to win. They have to sort of beat a specific other player, but that gives each of them their own optimal choices, and that dynamic in itself creates very, very interesting narratives because everyone wants something else, but not necessarily in opposition to everybody else. So it's not like a classic competitive game where you're trying to sort of push everyone to the side, but one where everyone sort of has their own optimal choice, creating dynamic, immersive even experiences because you find yourself drawn into this framework of the game. Like, I am thinking within the framework of the game. I'm thinking of what's my goal? What am I trying to reach? And since other people may or may not interfere with that goal, you have interesting dynamics. And out of those interesting dynamics and the way they are embedded in the theme of the game itself, you have a narrative, I think.
Yeah. So do you think it's up to the designers to create that framework? Or do you think that is naturally emergent? Because even in an abstract game such as Go or chess, right, you will still see stories. You can still find storylines emerging, right? Like from the competition between the players, their mastery of the landscape of the game and the moves that they make. You know, when people talk about chess, they call some players highly aggressive, highly defensive. So there's still storylines happening here, even though these are abstract games. I do want to pick up just to tell people how the New Angeles win structure works, because I think it's important for those people to understand. Let's say my victory condition is to have a higher score than Kara, but if I have that victory condition, it doesn't mean Kara loses. Kara's victory condition could be to have a higher score than Sami, right? And so I can win and she can win at the same time. So it's not if I win, everyone else loses, or if I win, Kara loses, which I thought was very interesting. Does anyone have any other thoughts on that, or shall we talk about small box games, which I think create a lot of narrative?
I think you brought something up, like with your example with Go, which is really interesting, and I think this is something that new designs could explore, because in my experience, most players have this, let's say, tendency to sort of pick their own goals if they're unsatisfied with the main goal of the game. Like, I've seen a lot of games where they know I can't win, so I'll pick whatever goal I want and just pursue that. So it's not like it's a very alien concept to most players. But I think a lot of game design is still focused on the idea that it has to be very rigid when it comes to victory conditions. It has to be very explicit and clear. You need to have 4 to 14 tiebreakers. And the idea of sort of ending in a tie or ending with some other solution than one player wins, everyone else loses, or flipping it around, everyone wins but one player. There's a lot more room there, and there's much more to explore in how players engage the design itself, and by extension how players engage the theme, and how the story that sort of comes to life in the imagination as they find themselves pursuing the goals within the game.
Someone says, I can't win, so I will make sure my nemesis loses. That's a comment by BGG Sarah. I've played with people where they can't win, but they want to make sure all their people, their little meeples, are happy and well fed by the end of the game. So that's their objective. I can't win, but I'm just going to make sure that I'm not last. I can't win, so I will help my best friend to win instead. Some people really hate that.
I love it.
But any thoughts on small box games with a lot of narrative? Someone in the comments suggested The Grizzled. Someone suggested Warhammer Quest adventure card game.
I would throw in maybe an off-brand choice, which is Insider by Oink Games, which is in itself a fairly abstract game. Like there's no theme to it, but because of the various dynamics that happen at the table, the mixed goals of individual players, I always feel like these games create very, very vivid memories and sort of have us invested because of various elements of the design, like the time limit, and it becomes a very interesting. Like you're trying to piece things together, you're trying to sort of grasp the memory of the game you've just played, and out of that, you naturally develop a story, a narrative. You remember, all right, first you said this, and you sort of, and I thought you were the insider. You knew there was the secret word, and then I followed this up, and so on and so forth. And I think that's sort of like a minuscule version of getting a narrative in a game without any of the thematic trappings that are great and fun, but they sort of give you taste for what's possible at the game table.
I actually have an answer, which is one of Sami's games, actually, Dale of Merchants. So Dale of Merchants is a deck building card game. I was very surprised when he said when he got started in narrative design that he didn't talk about this game, because this was the first game he made, if I'm not mistaken. And what happens in Dale of Merchants is it's a deck builder. You're trying to get good cards. You're trying to get your engine going. You're trying to draw cards in the right order. But each deck of cards in the game is an animal, or is represented by an animal. So there's a deck with the parrots and all the parrot cards. There's a deck with the beavers and all the beaver cards. There's a deck with the crocodile and all the crocodile cards. And each of these animals has a distinct personality, right? For example, the fennec foxes are very friendly and helpful. The crocodiles are very aggressive. The chameleons obviously will copy each other. And I think that this really helped me to get into the game, because the style, it has let me express my personality and my style of playing deck building games. And, by attaching cute animal avatars and fun little costumes and little knickknacks and items that they use throughout their daily life. One of my favorite cards in the game is called Cookies. It just has a picture of a cookie and a half-eaten cookie on it. It belongs to the parrots, and the parrots obviously have been eating cookies to get their energy going. It increases the size of your hand. So, to me that's narrative. To me that's storytelling. It tells a story about the culture of the parrots and how they view the world and how they see things. So to me that's narrative design. There's flavor text on the cards, but that's to me that's sort of secondary. Georgios, I remember you saying that flavor text is not even where the story is anymore. It's kind of like the paint on top of the story. It's not the actual story or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to ask you, do you feel that the game told the story, or do you feel that you told the story with the help of the game? Because that becomes sort of my position when it comes to narrative. The idea that the player is much more empowered and much more influential in creating the story, and the game and everything that comes with it gives them can give them a very varied toolbox and even some structure and help to create the story. But at the end of the day, it's the player that sort of makes it happen, because they are the protagonists. They are the ones pursuing the goals. They are the ones going through a character arc, if you will. They are the ones putting it all together, sort of making it make sense, turning like abstract mechanisms and pictures into a story. So like this, I'm sort of pushing myself. This is where I am right now, but I'm thinking about narrative in games.
I wanna pick up on a question that Greg on the Go asked a little while ago, which was, are there good examples of strongly narrative games that do not have a player avatar? And I'm picking that up because of what Jojo said, which is he thinks the player is the thing that tells the story, not the game, most of the time, which I tend to agree. Obviously, some games facilitate this better than others. Kara, Sami, any thoughts on this? Do you think that the player is the source of the story rather than the game? I mean, to a certain extent, this must be true because... Sorry, 1 second. And to a certain extent, I think this is 100% true because I could read all the flavor text in the world to my cat, and she wouldn't experience any kind of story at all, right? This could be said for anybody, for example, who has issues with reading or who just skips the flavor text or whatever. You know, they wouldn't experience any of that narrative, quote unquote. Okay, sorry, Sami, please continue.
Yeah, just example being one little game called Root that someone might have heard, where outside of the vagabond character, you're actually leading like an entire army and you don't have a central avatar, but still the actions of your faction with and other factions in the woodland create an emergent story on who rise to power and what happened during the war. And so at least I think you don't need a single avatar. And personally, I don't like project myself into a leader of the faction or anything like that. I just like observe the situation from above and make some decisions, but I'm still invested and like to tell the story of what happened during the game. So I don't think it's required to have a single avatar per se.
Kara?
Character avatars tend to be a useful tool. Not every player is going to feel comfortable telling their own narratives or embracing narratives, even if they're the ones playing the game and pushing the actions forward. They won't necessarily consider it as experiencing a narrative unless they have kind of the extra help from something like a character avatar or from flavor text. This isn't true of everyone. For example, talking about kind of abstract games that create narratives, my friends and I play Bonanza as if it were a story we tell, which is a game about bean farming, where you just have 2 fields, you can buy a 3rd field, and all you're doing is trading beans and planting them. But the way my friends and I play it, we have, long legacy stories that carry from game to game about who we are when we play Bonanza. And that is a game that also does not have any character avatars. And no flavor text, just a game about trading. But the way we trade in that game creates its own story, kind of the way trader games often create their own stories. But yeah, character avatars are a tool.
Did you say traitor games, as in like I stab you in the back, traitor, or trader games like I trade you?
Traitor games, like I stab you in the back.
Ah, nice. Greg is on the call. Ask Bonanza, the role-playing game coming soon from FFG.
We'll have to look into that license, right?
Sami, I want to ask you. So, do you feel that you were doing narrative? Because I talked about Day of Merchants just now and the design of each deck, right? So, at some point, you had to sit down and figure out. I assume that you must have designed the card functions. In some cases, you must have designed the card functions and then put the theme on top, like the cookies. Or maybe you had an idea for cookies because you just like the idea of parrots eating cookies, and then you created the function later. I'm sure this must have happened in one direction or another for that game. But do you want to talk a little bit about how you designed, how you decided what object belonged to what, how you created each of the cards for each of those cute animals in your game?
Sure. So the first version of the game, I already included like multiple different decks, and all of those were themed in a different way. Like one was take that deck, one was total randomness and chaos, one was copying abilities and things like that. And I just had to then invent a way to make players remember what deck is which. And I didn't think that as a narrative in the game, but rather like helping the player recognize and remember what decks they like and what kind of decks they are. So that's where I introduced the animals in there, and I basically just played around our world's perception of different animals and what we think about them. Like in one deck, the cards only get resolved at the start of your next turn, so I themed those as slots. so they're so slow with their actions that it takes a whole round for them to get to do those. And like the crocodiles are the mafia who all make threats and steal stuff from other players. And
one of their cards is
just,
a gun.
Yeah, so I just saw an opportunity and took it, and players really remember it extremely easily what decks they played and what they like and what they didn't like, and then they can gravitate towards other decks in the series. So I saw it like a bridge between mechanics and the team in the game, and less like a narrative opportunity. But I'm really happy if it then lends itself towards that as well. And I've heard from players or fans of the game, like after you have completed your so-called merchant stall, where you place cards in a row in front of you, the player who completes that first wins the game. So, and players have made their own house rules where they like to explain and display the cards in their stall at the end of the game. After the rule book has said that there's a winner, the game is over, you can now pack it away. But players still like to tell the story, like why they have the cookies in there and what's that what's that paint canister doing and things of such. So I think it's an example of if you manage to bring the gap between mechanics and the story and the theme in the game, if you manage to bring that gap as small or invisible as you can, it just lends for people to tell their own stories in that way.
Okay, so the next topic I want to talk about is segueing in from, because you said you did the theme and the art and stuff. I want to talk about components as a means of telling story, and I mean the physicality of the components. For example, the first time that one of the first times that I laughed at components in a game, like not what was happening, not the funny play that was happening. But I think the first time I laughed at the physical action of something happening in the game was we were playing Galaxy Trucker. And in Galaxy Trucker, you build a spaceship out of little square tiles. And the little square tiles have to connect to each other and so on. But obviously, because it's a real-time game and you have limited time and resources and tiles, sometimes you don't build your spaceship perfectly. And a little asteroid will come in and hit the ship, and your entire ship will break into two pieces, one of which has the engines and the other half has the people, for example. And so now you have your people drifting through space on a ship with no engines, no shields, no weapons, just a little cockpit with people in it. And then you can win the game because Galaxy Trucker is that kind of random nonsense. I remember the first time that I was afraid playing a game was playing Eldritch Horror, and I had made a pact with a darker power, and it says, you have made a pact with a darker power. You don't know when they will come calling to collect it, but they will. If ever this symbol appears in the game, flip this card. And there's an instant sense of dread, like what's on the back of the card? What's on the back of the card? Yeah. So components, I think, are a great way to push narrative in storytelling. Starting from Kara, what do you think about how designers can use the physicality of what's in the box to create the narrative? And you can talk about perhaps some examples that you've done as well.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about storytelling through physical components, one of the things to ask yourself is, what am I asking the players to physically do? And does it support what I'm saying that they're doing in the game? A really easy example of this is going to be puzzles for Mansions of Madness, both first edition and second edition, which is when we ask you to pick a lock, we're actually going to make you maneuver stuff around either a screen or, in second edition, it's a screen on the app. In first edition, it's little cardboard chits that you have to move around I want to say it's like a sliding puzzle. It's been a while since I played first edition. But that kind of physicality of I need to move my hands right to unlock this lock is very reminiscent to a lot of players of lockpicking, even if we've abstracted it slightly. Or there's I put there's a wire puzzle in first edition that I really loved, and so I wanted to do a bit of a scenario in second edition where you restore power to a house. And so I was like, I want to make a wire puzzle. I want to make it an image where you're trying to connect all the wires together to make the lights turn on, because players look at that and they instinctively go, oh, I'm trying to get the wires together, because once the wires are together, power will run through it and lights will turn on.
Would you say that there are certain things that create more story? Because, for example, I think the classic example that I'm thinking of is gamers say that, I don't necessarily agree with them, but one of the things that is often said is that miniatures are more immersive than meeples or standees, and I don't think that's true. I think standees have a certain application, and I think meeples have a certain application. I see Georgios making a face there. But Kara, I mean, your company, FFG, is famous for stuffing the box full of things. You know, what do you think about like toy factor as a way to or do you think sometimes it even gets in the way?
I think it's context dependent. One of the moments that tend to capture people when I first teach the Mansions of Madness is the first time a star spawn hits the board, because it's a huge figure with these big outstretched wings. And so it hits the board and players are immediately intimidated by it, in a way that if it were at the scale of other things, which cardboard standees don't have to be, but they sometimes are, it doesn't necessarily capture imagination the same way. But I definitely tend towards things like standees and meeples are also very good tools and perfectly fine. I think plastic serves purposes in some games, and other games are just fine if you don't do it. But I think
makes the game cheaper because plastic is very expensive.
Plastic is very expensive. But there is just this delightful moment, right, when you take something that is big and frightening looking and it has a heft, right? It thunks onto your board and players are like, do we have to fight that? Or can we run from that? Is that okay? They understand the threat immediately.
Yes. Sami, in your game, you have you can show, in fact, if you want, plastic components that fit into a cardboard board, and if you could explain why you chose to do that for narrative purposes.
Yep. Here, so Calvin is talking about this adventure board that we have in Lands of Culture, and you're playing as one of the adventures, and then you can prepare for your challenges that come in the game in different sorts. So you have 6 skills, and then you can swap in and out these marks to denote, to mark what kinds of gear you're holding. You also have an inventory with 3 slots, so you can have items, but these are we have abstracted most of the stuff just to these colored pegs, so you can make your character, there's a kind of skills or attributes on how well you can fight or observe or communicate with different folks.
And how do you use this?
Well, we wanted to team.
No, go
on. So what was your question?
So how
they
do
are
you use this
used whenever you're.
I think there's a time delay with
each time you're. Yeah. So each time you're you go have a skill check, so some sort of challenge against you. You're using one of these to solve the challenge, and these will tell what kind of character you're playing. So, for example, Bumir has marks on this side of this board, and these are all physical skills, and the other side is these are for mental tasks like communication, perception, and knowledge. And you can already see that Bumir is not the thinky type of character. He really likes to not use his head on solving problems. So those are here to tell you with a really quick glance. You can see what kind of character Bumir is. In addition to his portrait, you can already see that he really likes to put his body in the works instead of his mind, basically.
This helps also if the player wants to play as that type of character or doesn't want to play as that type of character, then they can instantly see. There's a visual, physical representation of what kind of person he is. beyond just the art or the text on the board. Georgios, what about you? Any thoughts on physicality from components?
I think everyone basically already touched on all those important things, like the physicality of it, the idea that you take something imagined, like just expressed in a word, and turn it into a physical representation, be it very, very colorful markers on Sami's board, be it these intimidating huge bigatures that you thunk on the table to scare players, or just I'm thinking of the somewhat controversial game of Cash and Guns, which has foam guns to point at other people. I remember one time playing this game with a friend of mine who literally started sweating when people started pointing his foam gun, because that was a term you mentioned earlier, the idea of immersion. It happens. It's much easier to immerse yourself in something that you see visually represented, apparently, than just the words themselves. Even though we probably all read books and love to get immersed in books, there's something that's an extra level of maybe shared immersion when we have it in front of us in some capacity, which is like why I pulled a face when you said this distinction between meeples and standees and miniatures, because I would kind of I agree with you that standees and miniatures are more or less the same bracket, but meeples are a bit too close to just wooden cubes, and they can feel very abstract to the point that they don't function as effectively in sort of pulling you into the game as a nice illustration can do, or even a nicely sculpted miniature.
But also meeples can project a certain feeling that maybe you want, right? Maybe this is a cutesy little game about farming. So you just have little meeples. Maybe they have a little wooden, like the shape has a little hat. So that can create the feeling that you want. Whereas a farmer miniature might not represent the same kind of feeling for the game. Right. I want to talk very briefly about. I know you had a question, Georgios, and I will get to that in a second. But I want to talk very briefly about a moment that I had with one of Kara's games, the upcoming Descent: Legends of the Dark. Kara invited me to playtest this game, and she said it's a new Descent game. And I was like, yes, let's do it. So me and my partner Dee went into the game. And Descent, if you don't know, is like an adventure game. It started out as a dungeon crawling type of thing. So we started the game. We picked our heroes. We had little miniature. We were doing this online, so we had little miniature 3D miniatures of our heroes put on the tiles on the board, and then we moved them forward. And then Kara put a 3D tree onto the board. I was like, a tree! I wish to touch the tree. And then Dee and I just went up to the tree and started touching it to see what would happen. And the tree in the game is basically, it's two pieces of cardboard, right? They just slot on top of each other, and it's tall. It's like that. That's a tree, right? That's the tree. That's what the tree looks like in your game. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I thought, oh wow, this is already going to be one of the best games ever. And then we got to the castle. She brought out the giant archway, and it's like, oh, a giant archway. This is so cool. Then she put the staircase down. And then the staircase was going up. And then she put the little stands, the little cardboard stands, and there was a second level where your miniatures could stand on. And then I was like, and then she said, there's a third level. You can go up one more. And when you're standing on top, and then I asked, if you're standing on top, do you have line of sight to the things below? And she's like, oh yeah, yes you do. And so that's why I'm thinking about, like, I'm always thinking about board games as a way to push physical components forward. What was it you said, Kara? Like, what you're doing in the game should be at least somewhat close to what you're asking your players to do, if you're trying to go for that level of immersion, rather than, a slightly more abstract game where, for example, I conduct research or I feed my people. I'm working on a board game design right now where, to eject from your vehicle, the player has to flip a card over that says, to eject, flip this card, and there's a big red button that says, slam this with your fist, and that's how you eject. So yeah, I think that designers have a lot of tools at their hands beyond just flavor text and art Georgios, you had a question.
Yeah, because some of the things Kara and Sammy mentioned sort of got me thinking about the various ways they described their experience of narrative. And I wonder whether we need to look at narrative in board games not as one catch-all term for different kinds of engagement with the game, but whether we need to differentiate between different types of narratives and therefore different types of engagement, different types of imagination, different types of interaction even. Like, for example, a game like Inside I mentioned earlier creates a very different narrative and and asks players to engage the game differently to get to this narrative than, say, a game like A Tale of Merchant does, or a game like Descent, or Eldritch Horror, or all these kinds of games that are out there. They all ask players to relate to the game differently to get a narrative out of it. Like in some cases, there are games that have a more or less fixed narrative, and you're asked as a player to just slowly unlock it, and that's the narrative you get.
Space Case in the comments is saying, like, what about narrative that pushes personal ethics? I had someone leave Sheriff of Nottingham because the amount of lying made them very uncomfortable. I think that ties perfectly into what you're saying right now.
Yeah, I mean, one of the games I wanted to mention about a game with no avatar was King's Dilemma, which again has I personally was blown away by the game, by what it does with narrative, and how it asks you to engage the game's narrative in a way that I hadn't seen before, because it sort of both asks you to be responsible of the narrative, because it's your decisions that actually shape how awful things become, but at the same time you can disassociate from the narrative. You can just go, well, I was playing to win, I don't care what happens to them. And it's sort of this tension that sort of the game shines the light on this tension, and sort of basically asked me, what kind of game narrative am I willing to engage in? What kind of game narrative do I want out of a game? And is there any possibility to sort of communicate that? Like, whether are there words we can use to say, oh, this is the kind of game which has a type of narrative where you're fairly passive, where you just move along. This is a type of narrative where you push a little bit, and this is the type of narrative where you do a lot of work. And they're all narrative, but sort of lumping them all together seems, I don't know. I think we're sort of we need some sort of better differentiation to actually get these games to the players that actually want them.
Sami, what do you think?
Well, I fully agree on George's observations that some games really tend push, like, this is narrative game because it has 1 million word written text, and then on the other hand we have something that like Insider has no such thing at all, and I don't think it even has a flavor text in the box even. Most games do have like few lines of what you're doing, but yeah, it's hard topic on how to convey that to the player, as that's one of my struggles as well as a publisher, is that I want people who would like my game to purchase it, and I don't want people who would not like it, because they would waste their money and their time doing so. So it's really a hard thing on how do I describe my game so it would gravitate towards players who would really like it, instead of just, oh, that looks nice, I want it, and once you get it, this is not what I actually was expecting. So there's like that's a hard thing to achieve.
Okay. I will be right back for 1 second, but Kara, what is your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually I absolutely agree with needing kind of more specific or finer language. Often one of the main pieces of feedback I'll give new designers when I work with them, or when I'm looking to make a game, is to set up kind of player expectations as soon as possible. And often those expectations are related to how they interact with the narrative, which is, if we're going to make flavor text, for instance, matter, make it something that's mechanical to the players, that we're going to require them to read to be able to, quote unquote, successfully play this game. We need to teach them that. because they might not know that about games. They might think that they can just skip all the flavor text, and then they're too far gone and they've missed all this important information that they'll need later when they play the game. And so a lot of early feedback, particularly in some of the games I've created that are kind of cooperative and have a game that tells you a story that then you push along, is teaching players how to interact with that game. Teaching players, like, here are the things we're going to ask you to pay attention to. Here are the ways in which the narrative will reward you, or the narrative wants to punish you if you ignore it, because players might not know that. And so I absolutely agree. I think that's a really, I don't know, it's very fascinating. I hope there's language there that can be refined.
I think personally, I think it's more of a spectrum, not really different types of games, like Georgia said. It's like a spectrum of how much narrative gets into it. And obviously, along the spectrum, there are subtypes and things like that. I want to pick up on something Sami said, where he said there's no flavor text in Insider. The title is flavor text, in my opinion, because it tells the players what they're doing. I think when we talk about having no theme in games, what we mean is that if we change the title and change the art, nothing about the experience of the game would meaningfully change. You know, like if you called chess something else, and you, instead of little soldiers, it was like trees, right? Or whatever, you know, would anything meaningfully change about that game? Maybe, and it's a debate to be had. But I think maybe I chose chess as a bad example, because with chess, it's explicitly about, you know, conquest and invading the other player's space and armies positioned to fight each other. I don't know. Maybe I chose a bad example. It is 10 at night. I'm a little tired.
Actually, I think it's a good example, because it kind of suggests that how much theme and how much flavor there is in a game depends heavily on the context we as players put into it. Like I play a lot of I'm in Germany. I play with a lot of German players who have a history with games, and I found that when I've played with German players, they were generally very mechanically focused, and they were more willing to sort of phase out everything but the mechanics from their experience. And I've played with international groups as well, and I have no idea if this is a cultural thing or not. Maybe just a coincidence, but I've seen their players more willing to sort of take into account the illustrations, take into account even the words. That, like you said, Insider is flavor text already. Take into account more aspects of what's outside of the mechanics, of the pure mechanical directions, to create their experience, to sort of, well, what they do see as part of the game and what they don't see as part of the game.
Right.
And
Heather says Blockers, Splendor, these are games that if you just change the name, change the aesthetic, the game itself wouldn't change very much. I can kind of agree with Blockers.
Yeah.
If you just change the pieces to have different colors or to represent, I don't know how much you can change Blockers, because it's pretty themeless as it is. With Splendor, I think definitely works. It doesn't have to be jewels. It can be anything. You could be collecting photographs. You could be stamp collectors.
I'm not sure, actually. Like the things you mentioned, like the moment you turn them into pictures, it becomes a game about memory. Like the moment you turn it, like you're collecting pictures, you're trying to sort of grasp onto these ideas, because all of these, like the images we use in Splendor, are as powerful or as meaningful, as evocative as they are to us personally. Like if I were to play Splendor themed to photographs, it would change my experience significantly. I have no connection to jewels, so yeah, I feel about as invested in jewels as I feel with pebbles, I guess.
Yeah.
But pictures are memories to me, and that triggers something. That sort of causes my imagination to go, all right, I'm collecting memories. I become the person who's into landscapes. I'm the person who's into portraits. I'm the person who's into snapshots, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I'm trying to say, that changing the theme, I kind of phrased it badly. I was trying to word it as like a hypothetical question. But changing the framing of the game changes how we feel about the game. It's like you said, if it was about collecting photos versus if it was collecting rocks versus if it was about collecting, live insects or whatever, the way that we would feel about it changes. I mean, for some people, the live insects thing is a plus. Some entomologists might be really, really into it. But for some people, like, no game about bugs. Thank you, no. I'm thinking about there's a friend of mine, a friend of ours, Kara, Nikki, once was working on a horror game. I think one of the Eldritch horror expansions or something. And Nikki has a fear of spiders, and they were writing a card, an event card for the game, and said 100 spiders emerged from the walls. And then Nikki was like, if it's 100 spiders, why didn't you just go all the way? 100,000 spiders. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what made it into the game. The card now says 100,000 spiders.
It's a Mythos event in Mansions of Madness second. Yep.
Okay.
It literally came from them asking, well, what's worse than 100 spiders? Well, 1,000 spiders. Wait, no. What's worse than 1,000 spiders? Oh, 100,000 spiders. Yeah, it was 100,000 times worse, it turns out.
It's true.
Yeah. Could you think you could have cranked the number up on that any higher, or do you think 100,000 is the correct level of horror and dread that you're? And obviously, the feeling of the sound when you say it too. It's not like 1,000,000 spiders. 1,000,000 is shorter. You have to say 100,000 spiders. Yeah.
The pacing of reading that out loud or saying it is adds weight to it.
So what I'm saying is, what I'm hearing is that event had poetry behind it. Like,
for sure,
choices definitely went into how you. And do you find that that's a disadvantage when you're making a game that you have to translate to 17 languages?
I sometimes it's not really a joke, more of an expression of despair. But I'll sometimes write something or read something someone else has written and just comment like it's like 100 translators cried out in pain and were suddenly silenced.
Yeah. So this is the other thing. When you create theme through your mechanics, you don't have to worry about translation. It's if you rely entirely on your flavor text, then translation becomes an issue. Which I think might part of be why the as Giorgio said, the German style of games maybe don't have enough as much narrative tie-in, because it has to work languagelessly. It has to work in because Europe is a relatively language diverse region inside a fairly small area compared to, for example, China, India, the United States, South America. So therefore, the languageless part of it might have contributed to the development of a lot of German-style games feeling themeless, as it were. Do you think so?
Actually, if I can just butt in for
no, that's what I'm asking you. I'm asking you.
All right, excellent. I may have a doctoral thesis in the distant future about this. No, but my short answer is I think, and this is a wild thesis, I think it has to do with the fact that German gaming does not have a strong appeal to simulation because it lacks the kind of background in wargaming that's present in other countries.
Yeah.
So they're less concerned about showing like mechanics, simulating something, showing something, and much more interested in mechanics creating something, be it interesting decisions, be it entertaining interactions, or even just a fascinating puzzle, and it's then sort of covered in some sort of theme to make it less dry and boring. But I find a lot of non-German designs, if you want to call them that, have a stronger interest in simulating something, interest in sort of, we want you to feel, like Harry said, we want you to feel what it is that you're doing, like what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to feel like a warrior. You're supposed to feel like a merchant. You're supposed to feel like whatever it is you're taking the place of in this game. So I think there's an interesting diversion historically, and maybe I can put time and get paid for writing about it.
I want to say that we're going to be wrapping up really shortly. So anyone who has any further questions, just leave them in the comments, and we might pick them up. Sami, I do want to ask you, as someone who's currently making a game with 500,000 words in it, how do you feel about this? Yeah, see, even Kara said.
And that was not an exaggeration. There's going to be over 300,000 words. So,
yeah. So, how do you feel about this? Because I'm doing some writing for the game, and when some of the things that I write, you don't understand. Not because you don't know the English language. Obviously, your English is very good, but just because the phrasing that I'm using. Like one of the things that I wrote was a call and response. Because it was characters putting on a puppet show. And the phrase I used was call and response. And call and response, in case you don't know, is a form of audience interaction with a performer, where if I say, wooden, you say meeple, right? Wooden, meeple. So that's what it's called. It's call, I call, and the audience response. So when I wrote the phrase call and response into the scene, Sami did not know what that meant. So it's just not maybe a commonly used phrase. I changed it. I changed it to something else. I made it more clear that it was just the audience got involved during the audience participation segments. So audience participation is a lot clearer than call and response. So it's a good thing that he didn't understand what I meant, because it might be a cultural phrase that doesn't exist in some places. What are your thoughts, Sami, on writing a game with a lot of text? In terms of like making sure that your story is conveyed and understood in a way that you want.
Well, there's obviously
Kara, you can come in on this too. Sorry. Kara, you can come in on this too, because your game, Let Descent, also has a lot of text. But Sami first.
Yeah, well, there's the lovely word playtesting, which we're all probably known and heard sometimes. So, for example, when I read and proofread the stories, it's often that even if I don't understand it, I might Google it, what it means. But I have to trust like my own understanding that if I don't understand it, at least at first, that there are other people as well, because there are going to be a lot of non-native English speakers playing the game. So I just want, and the game will boggle down a lot if you can't understand the words and phrases when they are represented to you, and it will bog and prolong the game a lot. So oftentimes I just ask that, can you just rewrite it just a little bit to be more understandable for especially us non-native English speakers, and then after it has gone through our reading and passes, we will play test the heck out of it. And every time someone ask you to repeat some part, we have to rewrite that just a little bit to make it more. So trying to write it in the best possible way that the story doesn't suffer from it, but it's more easier and cleaner to understand when you're playing, because it's a way we have figured out that when you're playing a game, you're more likely to struggle and skip through it if you don't understand it the first time, compared to if you're like reading a book or watching a movie or something like that, where you're in there for the immersion. But with board games, we can really easily break that immersion if it's not as effortless as it can be.
Yeah. Before we move slightly to Kara, I do want to say that one thing that you were talking about, voice acting with the Forgotten Waters app, everyone says, oh yeah, voice acting. But then if you do voice acting, you're adding a significant amount of cost, not just for the English actors, but the German actors, the Spanish actors, the Italian actors, the Mandarin actors. Yeah. So the translation efforts are Herculean. So voice acting is not just something that you could just drop into a game. But other than that, you're also doing a game with a lot of text. How do you feel about what Sami said, and how do you make sure that your intent is conveyed? And as Sami said, in some cases, if the players don't understand the choice, then they might feel, tricked or betrayed when they choose the wrong thing because they didn't understand what it is that was being said.
Yeah, so Sammy's point.
And sorry, just to how do you counteract that with wanting to make the text feel unique and read well versus how do you balance clarity versus like poeticism, basically?
Yeah, it's. I used to joke with a coworker of mine, Grace, that you basically have an allowance for being poetic. You get to choose where and when you want to be poetic in the moments that matter and are interesting. And then you should keep other things fairly straightforward, both to keep the players knowing what's going on. Because like you could describe every door you find or every tree you find very poetically. Or you could just say it's a tree. And then focus on what the cool thing the person does with the tree instead and describe that in a cool way rather than, oh, it's, here's like 6 different versions of a tree. So I think picking where you're going to have the highest player impact when you describe something poetically is important. And then honestly, at least through FFG, we do back and forths where we get questions from our translators that then we directly answer as designers. And so I'm trying to think of what lessons I've learned from that. Most of them have been, if I use unique turns and phrases, I try and actually mark them even before they go to translators so that I can like leave a comment that's like I have a tendency, or I guess a fondness for using made up collective nouns. So like a mischief of children is one example. And so I just kind of mark them like, this is just a collective noun, whatever sounds, however you want to talk about this being just a group of kids that are out here, feel free. Like you don't have to, it doesn't have to sound just like this does.
Right.
When there is story stuff that matters, for example, I've written mystery scenarios where there are details that can't be, when they're translated, they have to be maintained in some sort of way because it's how the game is solved and how they continue playing it. I also find ways to note that in specific, and give, whenever possible, the translators the context for why something needs to kind of stay the way it is. So yeah, I'm not sure how helpful all that was, but that's the process.
But having just letting people keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Making their stuff. Is there anything else that anyone else wants to say briefly before we wrap up for the session? We didn't get any questions from chat, so I assume chat is perfectly satisfied with everything that has occurred on this panel.
I am like bouncing off of what Kara said, which I thought was really interesting. I was reminded of another small series of card games, which are also surprisingly narrative. And I don't know if you know them. It's the Sherlock series, which is a one-time puzzle series. And I don't know why I only think of them now, but I find them a great example of how, again, you're piecing together the narrative, but if it feels like you're like detectives, actual detectives trying to come up with the scenarios. Like it really feels the way that a lot of detective shows feel, a lot of mystery shows.
You're eliminating things off a list and you're deciding, like, no, that's not the one, that's the one.
Exactly. It's like, is this a plausible scenario? Is this how it could have happened? Or is this how it could have happened? And that's just, it feels very authentic. It feels very much like this is exactly what it feels like to watch a TV show about these kind of things. And it does so in a very interesting way by not telling you the story, but just giving you bits and pieces. And yeah, I just want to throw that out there because it's for everyone who's interested in that kind of thing.
Yeah. Someone in chat has asked for everyone's Twitter info on Twitter, or how to get in touch with you or join your Discord communities or whatever. Please stick them in the chat and Heather will post them in the main comments. Okay, I think we're going to wrap this up now. So unless Sami had anything he wanted to say as well.
I think we have covered quite a lot of ground here, and I'm happy to end here.
Okay, I'm going to ask everybody to say again who they are and what they're working on and where people can find them. But this time we're not going to go clockwise or counterclockwise. We're going to throw caution to the wind and do mania. We'll start with Sami. Yeah.
All right, so I'm Sami Laakso from Snowled Design, publisher, drawer, illustrator, designer, all that jazz from Finland. And I'm working on Lands of Culture, an open world adventure game. And Calvin is also writing stories for the game as well.
Kickstarter soon, or crowdfunding
Game
soon.
Found.
Yes. We'll go with Georgios.
Yeah, I write articles mostly in German for Spielbar.com, translate them onto lessmyopinions.com, translate and consult and edit for anyone who's willing to pay me, and I'm working on a. If you understand German, I highly recommend a podcast I'm doing with Per Sylvester where we're parallel designing games to sort of let people in on the kind of struggles people have when an experienced designer like Per and a complete noob like me try to finish a game, and we'll see where it goes. So far, I think I'm winning. It's not a competition, but if it were, I'm winning.
Kara.
Yes, my name is Kara Santel-Dunk, and I make games at Fantasy Flight Games. I've worked on Mantis Madness and Journeys to Middle-earth, but most recently, and coming out in the next coming months, was Descent Legends of the Dark.
Do you have the box?
I don't. I don't have the box.
No.
I am lying in wait. I want the box so bad. I want to start painting minis.
Yeah, but it is a fairly large cube.
It's chunky. It's a chunky friend.
Child. It's a chunky child that you have given birth to. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. This was a lovely experience. I'm glad that we got to do this. Thank you, NON3PUB, the Unpublished Games Network, and to NON3PUB for having us along. Anyone else in chat? Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your questions. Everyone, also say thank you to Heather for doing all the behind-the-scenes stuff and making sure that everything ran great. If we could all just say thank you, Heather. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Heather.
And thank you to everyone in the comments. Bye, friends.